I'd like to start, since people are having trouble getting here, saying something. First, I think we're going to show a couple of minutes from last week's APP conference in Boston, where David Barsamian and Noam Chomsky had a conversation. But before doing so, I just want to say one little thing. Again, people were trickling in. This was at MIT last week. And at some point, one of the individuals, one of the members of the audience approached me and said, "Is this the event where Leon Trotsky is speaking?" And Noam Chomsky, Leon Trotsky, same thing. Right? So I said, yes, please come in. He's going to be here. So let's see what Leon Trotsky has to say about Armenians and progressive politics.
Well, you've got grandchildren. What kind of world do you see them inheriting?
The world that we're creating for our grandchildren is pretty grim. The major concern ought to be the one that was brought up in New York at the march last Sunday. A couple 100,000 people marched in New York calling for some serious action on global warming. And this is no joke. This is the first time in the history of the human species where we have to make decisions which will determine whether there will be decent survival for our grandchildren. That's never happened before. Already, we have made decisions which are wiping out species around the world at a phenomenal level. The level of species destruction in the world today is about at the level of 65 million years ago, when an asteroid, huge asteroid, hit the Earth and had horrifying ecological effects. It ended the age of the dinosaurs. They were wiped out. It kind of left a little opening for small mammals that began to develop, ultimately us. Same thing's happening now, except that we're the asteroid. What we're doing to the environment is already creating conditions like those of 65 million years ago. And a human civilization is tottering at the edge of this. And the picture doesn't look pretty. So at the Sunday, the day of the march, which was a very positive development and an indication that you can do things, it's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to wipe everything out. The same day, one of the major international monitoring scientific agencies presented the data on greenhouse emissions for the latest year on record, 2013. They reached record levels. It went up over 2% beyond the preceding year, and for the United States went up even higher, almost 3%. The Journal of the American Medical Association came out with a study the same day looking at the number of super hot days that are predicted for New York over the next couple of decades. Super hot means over 90. They predicted it'll triple for New York and much worse effects farther south. This is all going along with predicted sea level rise, which is going to put a lot of Boston underwater, let alone, say, Bangladesh coastal plain, where hundreds of millions of people live, will be wiped out. All of this is imminent. And at this very moment, the logic of our institutions is driving it forward. So ExxonMobil, which is the biggest energy producer, has announced that, and you can't really criticize them for it. This is,
the fact that Turkish-Armenian relations have a lot to essentially leave a lot to be desired is not going to look as bad. It's really a privilege for me to moderate this session with Nancy and David, two individuals who have their careers. One of the main challenges that we as Armenians have is sometimes we don't have this challenge, in fact, and that's another challenge in and of itself, is to really try to not, so when we're dealing with the experience of 1915, centuries of persecution, dispossession, etc., do not make this really force us to fold into ourselves and make us try to really reach out, right, to other dispossessed peoples, to other groups who have been and are in the here and now facing challenges that are very similar, right? And the two individuals who are speaking today, David and Nancy, have done exactly that, each in their own way. And I think that is one of the most meaningful ways in which one would struggle for justice, right? One of the most meaningful ways in which one would honor, their legacy, their history, and their history of persecution as well. So, I was recently, a couple of weeks ago, we were doing an event at Clark University, and I was asked how my experience, my family's experience with the Armenian genocide, in fact, how it affected my career choices, eventually landing me in this position of wanting to become a historian of the Armenian genocide. And my response was that, in fact, yes, the Armenian genocide might have had a role in making me an activist, but what made me a historian was, in fact, the Lebanese Civil War. It was not the genocide. It was seeing and witnessing man's inhumanity towards man play out in front of you for years and years. And of course, I'm not comparing here civil war to genocide, but the point I'm trying to make is that, current events, the challenges that we face today, are the ones that shape our lives, and we have this privilege. In fact, we have this distinction of knowing what mass atrocities mean and what kind of destruction they bring to families and communities and generations. So I think we are placed we do have this responsibility, I would say, to try to be part of the discourse today, part of the discussion today about human rights, injustices, etc. And so that's what David and Nancy have done. And I know you have access to their bios. Do they? Okay, online. But I will briefly introduce them. David is going to speak first. David is the founder and director of Alternative Radio. He has published several books with Noam Chomsky, Arundhati Roy, Edward Said, Iqbal Ahmed, others, Tariq Ali. And he has, in fact, his work, he's been one of the pioneers of independent, alternative, progressive radio in the United States. David is, one of the things that you will see here today is, they will speak about their experiences, they will speak about the Armenian experience, as well as try to situate this within the broader, world of activism. And there will be discussions that will be sad. I know that David is going to be playing a testimony from his mother, who was a genocide survivor. And there will be discussions that will make us laugh, and hopefully the discussion will also be informative. And that's what we aim to present here. Yet, again, with the Armenian condition, it's very difficult to separate the comedy from the tragedy. 100 years ago, Yervant Odian, the celebrated Armenian writer, was a survivor of the genocide and someone who eventually ended up writing about his experience. He was invited to speak at an Armenian orphanage in Aleppo. And the teachers, essentially, this is how they sold the idea to the students. This is how they prepared the students. They said, there's this guy, Yervant Odian, he's hilarious, right? He writes these books, he's very funny, etc. He's going to come today and tell you jokes, right? And this is what the students, all these orphans at the Aleppo orphanage were preparing for. And then Yervant Odian arrives, right? This is a man who has witnessed the entire experience of the genocide. He arrives and looks at these children, these orphans, right? The remnants of the Armenian nation. He looks at them and he starts weeping. And he says, I love you very much. And those would be the only words he would say that day. And again, in an attempt even to really provide, entertainment and comedy to these orphans, right? The Armenian experience had to deal with some of the tragic experiences. So, without further ado, I would like to invite first David and then Nancy to present. David?
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here and to be introduced by Khatchig Mouradian, who is just doing amazing work, not just in the academy, but in journalism, and I very much appreciate his being here and everything he's doing. So I hope you're all well and are somewhat familiar with alternative radio, something I began in Boulder in the 1980s when I was, surprise, surprise, fed up with the corporate media, with their lies, with their distortions, with their fabrications, with their insane propaganda in support of unsupportable and unethical and immoral policies. For example, alliances with Turkey, alliances with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, one of the most retrograde regimes on the face of the earth, misogynist, patriarchal, feudal. It's not even a country. It's a family-run business like Kuwait, like the Emirates. And these are our close allies in the Middle East. So I think if we want to understand and talk about justice, we have to talk about imperialism. And we have to talk about capitalism, the economic system, which is the foundation of imperialism. And it's imperial interests that has prevented the United States, through successive administrations, from acknowledging the justice of the Armenian cause because of its unholy alliance with the Turkish state. They go through all kinds of contortions, and I'm sorry to say that many well-meaning Armenians write checks to American politicians, usually running for the White House, $100,000 checks, $50,000 checks, go to these dinners, and there they're shaking hands, and it doesn't matter with who it is, whether it's Reagan or Clinton or Obama. They are not going to acknowledge the justice of what happened in 1915 and subsequently because of the imperial interests that they represent. So I think we're deeply deluded when we think, oh, well, Obama's going to be different. How many of you felt like that? How many of you thought, well, Barack Obama, this guy is cool. He even went to Occidental College. Did you know that? And then he went to Harvard, of course. He was different. He spoke out clearly with great articulation, much more than any of his predecessors, about what happened in 1915. But then some amazing transformation happens to American politicians when they reach the Oval Office, when they become elected. They completely, of course, forget their promises. They forget what they had, in fact, their own historical record, and then they become apologists for the status quo. I think it's important to understand these kinds of realities about what we're dealing with here. These are not nice guys. They may appear to be nice guys, but they are masters of the universe. They are the masters of the economy, and they have their own agenda and their own set of interests. And it's easy for them to endorse your check and say, sure, I'll help the Armenians, I'll recognize what happened in 1915 and afterwards, and then say, have a nice day. And it's happened so many times. I mean, we should not be disappointed by American politicians fulfilling their institutional role. That's what they're about. Now, I was just driving on, some of you have been on 10. It's a big, what is that, interstate here, or whatever it is? California State 10, or is it US 10? And I came across a genocide marker. Whoa, my jaw dropped. Do you know I was driving, or my friend Ali Reza Ahmadpour, we were driving on Christopher Columbus Transcontinental Highway. What? You have a highway here in California named after Christopher Columbus?
That's a federal.
It's a federal highway.
Florida here.
Right here.
Florida.
Well, people take umbrage, as they should, when the Turkish state honors Talat Pasha and Enver and other genocidal maniacs and homicidal murderers in Turkey with statues, with school names, with boulevards named after them. But are we any different? What about in my hometown and where Nancy lives, New York, Columbus Circle, Columbus Avenue? why are we honoring right here in the United States, 500 years after the arrival of Christopher Columbus to, well, not to the US, but to the Caribbean, why are we still honoring him? So we have some work to do right here in the US, and that may be a good connection to get people educated about the Armenian genocide, when we ourselves, as Americans, cannot recognize our own historical past. So I think that's, absolutely an essential thing to do. There's so much that we can connect with. For example, what has happened in Ferguson, Missouri, race murders. That's the only way to describe them. These are extrajudicial assassinations of citizens, of people who are, in most instances, unarmed. In Florida, the same kind of thing has happened. Again, this has been a pattern, which I think I'm going to make the outrageous and audacious claim that the extreme violence that happens inside the country here is connected to our foreign policy, which is out of control violence, with 735 military bases around the world and almost $1 trillion going to the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex. Now, how did I get so agitated and wound up? Well, I think, my mother, Araksi, had a lot to do with it, and the people I grew up with in New York, because there was this enormous shadow over the family of what happened in 1915, and I tried desperately to understand it. I was a kind of mini historian, asking questions, and amateur journalist, trying to figure out, well, why? Why did this happen? And I was getting very unsatisfactory answers, partly because my parents and people around us were not very well educated, and most of the responses were, well, the Turks were cruel people, they hated us, but I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand what causes this violence to be released. What mechanisms are at work that these toxins are, injected into the atmosphere and turn perfectly normal people into monsters. And we see that, with all of the Holocaust studies that have been done. People often say, gee, our neighbors were so kind. We would celebrate their kids' birthdays. They would come to our house and celebrate our kids' birthdays. We would go to the synagogue, or they would come to the church. How could the Germans turn into these kinds of monsters? I mean, I think that's a very interesting psychological and philosophical question. I'm not going to address that right now. I don't dare. But I am going to play for you an excerpt from a talk that my mother gave at the University of Colorado at Denver, just to give you a little flavor of that. I know this won't be breaking news for a lot of you, but still to connect with those voices and that history through, at this point, an 80-year-old woman. She was 10 years old at the time of 1915. That was Robert Fisk on the Armenian Holocaust. Now you will hear eyewitness testimony from Araksi Barsamian, my mother. She survived the He spoke West around 1986, just a few months before her death. Araksi spoke to a history class at the University of Colorado at Denver. I was there with her. She begins by describing what happened to her father.
When we left, my family was 25 in a family. They took all the men folks. They asked my father, where's your ammunition? He says, I sold it. So he says, go get it. So when he went in a Kurd town to get it, they beat him, and they took him all his clothes, and when he came back, this is my mother tells me story. When he came back, bare body, he went in a jail. They cut his arms. Where's the ammunition? He says, I haven't got it. They didn't give me. So he died in a jail. And All the men, they took all the men in the field, they tied their hands and they shoot it, killed it. Every one of them. I remember they collect the only 15 years old boys left, just like this. They were sitting and their hands are tied back, and they took in the field, they shoot them too. Nothing left, only women and small children. We were in
Deported.
We deported in some city, bare food, nothing to eat. They took everything from us. They say, we put in a church, when you come back, we'll give you back, which is not true. So we went to some city, my aunt gave a birth. She left her baby over there, and then we walk. So many, no water. I remember my mother used her handkerchief and, horse urine and wipe our mouth. We were so dry. Just think that. And then in Chitzim, I forgot.
All right, so I think you get the. I really can't listen to any more of that without just crying. But that information, that tapestry, had a tremendous. Not just intellectual influence on me, but an emotional influence on me, and why I've tried in the work I've been doing over the last 30, 40 years is to promote justice wherever I find injustice. And since I'm a citizen of this country, a citizen of the empire, I'm very interested in correcting U.S. policy whenever and wherever I can. I don't want to sound too sanctimonious or virtuous about that. I mean, I think it's the only thing, it's one way, as Khatchig suggested, of honoring the past by fighting for justice in the present. So we want to also remember what George Santayana said, the Spanish philosopher. Those who forget the past are condemned to relive it. And we have seen these kinds of events being repeated. And U.S. policy has contributed, unfortunately, very significantly to violence around the world. We're now all engulfed in news about ISIS. We're all supposed to be afraid of ISIS. Where did ISIS come from? I thought it was about Al-Qaeda. Oh, I thought it was about Hezbollah. No, it's Hamas. One after another, these groups are rising up. There is no scrutiny of the policies that are behind, that provoke these groups from forming. This is not in any way an endorsement of their policies or their very, horrendous techniques and attitudes, deeply rooted in patriarchy, by the way. But U.S. policy and Saudi policy. Now, here you had Chuck Hagel, the war secretary, said that there's never been any group like ISIS in the history of terrorism. And so why? There's been no group like that? Because they are tremendously well funded. Well, the question then to the journalists who were sitting in front of it was, well, where is the money coming from? Nobody asked that question. The money is coming primarily from Saudi Arabia. The money is coming primarily from Qatar and from the United Arab Emirates. And Turkey is the enabler of ISIS. The Turkish borders have been wide open for the arrival of so-called, freedom fighters. These are again the reincarnation of the Afghan Mujahideen of the 1980s, when your great governor of California and then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, called them freedom fighters. He compared them to the founding fathers, which was an interesting comparison. Maybe he knew something about the founding fathers that we don't find in our textbooks. But I don't want to dwell on Reagan too long because he's too easy of a target. But Turkey has been central to what has been evolving, particularly in Syria, when Obama announced that Assad must go. Imagine if North Korea or Iran announced that Obama must go. What the response would be? I mean, there'd be nuclear war. There'd be all-out attack and interfering, meddling in the internal affairs of a sovereign country. I mean, here was Obama speaking at the UN denouncing Putin, I'm no admirer of Putin. He's another violent patriarch and a tyrant. And what was Obama saying? He said, Putin in the Ukraine and Crimea seems to think that big and powerful nations can bully weaker ones. Is there a sense of irony here, or any awareness of just recent U.S. history? I won't go deep into U.S. history. Start with Grenada in 1983, Panama 1989, the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, the Afghan invasion, the bombings of Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, all of these countries, U.S. intervention in North Africa, Libya, in West Africa. No sense of that the United States may be, in fact, replicating the very things that they are doing around the world. But when you have a compliant corporate media, when you have people, competing for the best hair on the air and trying to out-obsequious and out-kowtow the previous ones. Did any of you see this appalling interview with Obama that was on 60 Minutes last Sunday with what was his name? Steve Kroft. He's considered a tough investigative reporter. He, like all of these other journalists, gave a complete blank check and get out of jail pass to Obama. There was no counter questions to any of the assertions Obama made in this interview. For example, he said the United States is the indispensable nation. Who said that? I mean, maybe I missed it. I travel a lot. Maybe there was an edict from some divine source that said the United States was the indispensable nation. On that basis, we have created a huge military machine that is not just choking many people literally, but is also killing the earth. And that, I want to come back to the environmental crisis, the eco-crisis, because at every public event, I always talk about what is happening to Mother Earth, to Pachamama, to Gaia, to Mother Nature. There's an all-out war on nature. And this is carried out by corporations who are looting and plundering the earth of its resources, its water, its iron ore, all of the things that are so precious to humankind that we need to preserve. I mean, it was mentioned by Chomsky last week and in this video about species extinction. It is an absolutely unprecedented rate. In fact, that's a word that has actually lost a lot of its meaning because it's used so often now, it's become devalued. Everything is unprecedented loss of species habitat, unprecedented loss of fish stocks because of the acidification of the oceans. We are facing an enormous crisis that can only be addressed collectively. So I think maybe here I can connect with some of ARF's socialist philosophy, because only through collective action can we address this particular issue. If Ivory Coast has a great environmental policy, it won't amount to anything. If it's just Burkina Faso, it won't matter. It has to be global. It has to be organized and systematic, and time is running out. That's another expression you'll hear a lot about, tipping points, time is running out, but we do know that what is happening to the earth is very critical, and we have to do something about it. So again, that goes back to capitalism, the economic system in which we supposedly enjoy the benefits of. It's a system that is rapacious, it is predatory, it's based on maximizing profits. That's in its DNA. It's not because these people are evil. I've talked to some of them. They're very nice guys. They have children, they have grandchildren, they like rock and roll, you know, they like rap music, they like poetry, but they are managers in a system which demands that profits be constantly produced, that you expand or die. So right now, we're in the cancer stage of capitalism, when the whole show is going to end. The tumor is growing, it's metastasizing, and ultimately it will consume its host, that is, the planet itself. So we have a lot of work to do on multiple issues, but I think it's important to make the connections between US foreign policy, imperialism, which is the only word that can describe US foreign policy, and you'll never hear it in the corporate media, except when they're talking about the British or the French or Soviet Union or Holland or Belgium, but they'll never use the noun imperialism with the adjective American in front of it. It just cannot happen. It can happen on alternative radio. It can happen on KPFK. It can happen on Democracy Now! And a few other programs. Maybe even Jazeera sometimes, and RT TV. So there are independent outlets out there where you can get some radical information outside the box that breaks through the veil of deceit and just the tsunami of mendacities that we're enveloped with here. I just want to close. I know we want to hear Nancy and then maybe get to a discussion. But talking about something that Chomsky kind of coined, and that is worthy and unworthy victims. It's a very interesting formulation. A propaganda system will consistently portray people abused in enemy states as worthy victims. So I think we can all think of examples of that. Do you remember how the US, again, you know, the great Ronald Reagan, but later Clinton and then Bush and Obama, they have all been bleeding, you know, and their breasts and beating their breasts about, you know, the terrible situation of the Kurds in northern Iraq, right? Halabja, the Halabja massacre, etc. Well, there's an interesting kind of story because there's a mountain in northern Iraq called Mount Kandil, and there are Kurds on both sides of this mountain. But in the US State Department formulation, the Kurds on the Turkish side are terrorists, right? They're PKK. But the Kurds on the other side are freedom fighters. Why? Because they're fighting Iran. So you see the double standards, the hypocrisy. You know, my friend Michael Parenti likes to say, the United States doesn't make the world safe for democracy, it makes it safe for hypocrisy. And we saw the same thing, we see the same thing in Afghanistan. There are good Afghans and bad Afghans. Although in this case, it seemed like they were all bad Afghans because we have backed one drug lord, one warlord, one drug smuggler, one mass murderer after another. In fact, the current vice president of Afghanistan is Abdul Rahman Dostum, a known mass murderer. And he is now the vice president of an allied country of the United States. Why can't, and then just another example in the media, you've all heard of Jim Foley, the American journalist who was beheaded. You've all heard of Steven Satloff, another American journalist. You all heard of the Israeli prisoner that was held for 5 years by Hamas in Gaza, Gilad Shalit. But how many of you heard of the Afghan women who died? Of Mumtaz Mahal, who was killed in Pakistan by a US drone strike? Those are the empire. They have no material value for imperialism or for capitalism. So they die in silence, and they die in horrendous ways. And, so one group is elevated, there's a lot of attention, everybody knows about them, and then and these other people are just simply forgotten. They are the collateral damage of US foreign policy. And if you want to understand why groups are rising, has anyone made the connection between Boko Haram and all of these other groups, starting in Nigeria, all the way across into West and South Asia also? It is primarily connected to US interventions throughout the Middle East. Unrelenting, almost fanatical support for the state of Israel. I mean, way over the top. Support for military dictatorships in Egypt. Now we've embraced Sisi as the new liberator. In fact, after a rigged election in which he got 97% of the vote in end of May, beginning of June of this year, I mean, it was like the old Soviet Union, when the candidates would get 99%. Sisi only got 97%. John Kerry, our Secretary of State, said this was restoring democracy. He said Egypt is making progress toward, a brighter future. And then while he was there, he gave what? Egypt needs food. Egypt needs water. Egypt needs healthcare, education, training, nurses, doctors. What did he leave them? Black Hawk helicopters, Apache gunships. Once again, we are arming to the teeth, some of the most ruthless and brutal dictators in the entire region. In the case of Saudi Arabia, I think it's really extreme, this alliance that we have, that was formulated by FDR in February of 1945 in a kind of deal that they made on a US destroyer in the Suez Canal that hardly anyone talks about or hardly anyone knows about. But the deal was, we will protect the Saudi monarchy far into the future, as long as US corporations have access to your oil. That was the Faustian bargain. And you've seen how that's played out in the 69 years since Roosevelt and Ibn Saud made that agreement. We have to change US foreign policy. We have to change the economy. We have to change the way we do business. There is so much to do, and particularly for the young people in the audience. I challenge you, because it's your future. I'm closer to the end than to the beginning. But what's going to happen in the next decades will have an enormous influence on your lives. So I would say don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. Embrace these challenges. Engage them. Find kindred spirits. Find groups that you can identify with, that you feel comfortable with. Maybe they're not perfect. They won't be perfect. There'll always be, tensions and egos clashing. But to find common ground is very, very important. And, step by step, we can make a difference. We can change the world. The game is not over. Don't be afraid. Thank you very much.